Unit 3, Lesson 7, Mr. Bowlby's English class. The students, we are going to read a poem by Dan Garber today. Dan Gerber. Is it Gerber? Probably Gerber. Anyway, he is a poet he got his English degree in 1962. He did die in a professional car crash in 1966. That's pretty sad. He only taught for a number of years then. He did teach English and he wrote poetry based on his teaching of English. He really liked English, and poetry made him just made his. It's you read the biography. We are going to the poetic words here. We are going to be reading lesson 7, so page 76 in your book. The poet Dan Gerber, his poem Advice. Now, today you'll be able to, after this lesson, define and identify implied metaphor in poetry. Implied metaphor. You'll be able to explain the poem's structure, helps reinforce the speaker's perspective. By the end, you'll also revise the metaphors you crafted in your previous lesson to indicate human action or feeling, and incorporate your metaphor into original advice poems modeled on Dan Gerber's Advice. So, Gerber's poem itself shows an interaction between one generation passing down wisdom to the next, which is what we all hope to do as teachers, is pass down wisdom to the next generation, as it is. Implied metaphor is comparison that is not made directly. That's another one of those literary vocabulary words that you might want to know in case I give you a quiz. Quizzes for vocabulary words will happen. You may think about a time when you had a problem or needed advice on something that might help you get into this poem. Okay. You know how, after it rains, my father told me one August afternoon, when I struggled with something hurtful my best friend had said, how worms come out and crawl all over the sidewalk, and it stays a big mess a long time after it's over, if you step on them. Leave them alone, he went on to say, after clearing his throat. And when the rain stops, they crawl back into the ground. So, what problem is the speaker having? His best friend said something hurtful. That happens to all of us. So, when someone asks someone's advice, you generally expect them to tell you what to do. But the father here doesn't directly tell his son. He gives him advice in not exactly the straightforward way that he had hoped. We're going to go ahead and open up our poetry journal to 7.1, page 78. Answer the following questions. You may consult the poem as you work. The speaker tells us that he struggled with his friend's words. Based on that, how do you think the speaker felt about what happened? So the speaker obviously is upset. He's going to his father for advice, so his best friend must have said something pretty hurtful. And, words are like toothpaste. Once they're out of the tube, you can't get them back in. It's like spilling water on the ground out of a bottle of water. You can't pick the water back up and put it back in. Once those words are out, they're out, and they cause damage. But the more you reflect on the damage, the greater the damage gets. It's like tearing out a hole in a cloth. Messing with it's only going to make the hole bigger. So, the next question. In stanza 1, the father describes a scene involving worms. What do worms do, and how do people in the stanza react to them? When it rains, worms come out. If they get stepped on, it makes a big mess. After it rains, if they can make it back to the ground, they go back to the ground. Mine tend to get lost in the middle of my driveway, but I think this implies just for anywhere. Worms do come up when it starts raining, in general, as a rule. But in the words of the father in the stanza, people leave them alone, right? So if you as he recommends, if you leave them alone in stanza 2, he says, leave them alone, they crawl back into the ground. Number 3 says, what does the father believe happens if people step on worms in stanza 1? They make a big mess. Number 2, or number, snapping. Who am I snapping at? Myself? Okay, number 4. In stanza 2, the father describes another way to act. What is it? Use the words from the stanza in your answer. Always go back to what you're reading. Use the words from that. Show me that you can cite from the main source. When you're doing your tests, your 5th grade reading test, you're doing your whatever test down the road, you're going to be given paragraphs of things to read and to understand your comprehension skills. And you're going to need to be able to take that information and digest it and then put it out on the test questions that they ask you. So you're going to want to be able to look for information in poetry and in anything and retell it, rephrase it, put it out so that it can be understood. So it's important for you to look and see what is going on in the poem and use those words to answer these questions. Stanza 2, the father describes another way to act. What is it? And use the words from your stanza. Just leave them alone. The worms will crawl back into the ground. Number 5, what does the father say will happen to the worms if people act that way? He recommends leave them alone and the worms will go back into the ground. Each question is very step by step. It's not being redundant, it's just trying to get as much detail and trying to get us to focus as much as we can on what is going on in the poem. So, now, the speaker, also, why is the father clearing his throat? I mean, it doesn't appear that he's sick. So it might just be that the father is emotional about the advice that he's giving. There is a difference between the way the speaker initially reacts to the situation and the way the father tells him he should react. So he's not acting the same way as the father is telling him to act. Basically, the speaker is concentrating on the hurtful words, but the father's telling him to leave it alone. Maybe give your best friend some space. Maybe that's all they need. Maybe that's what you need. Everybody sometimes needs space. We just do. Sometimes more than we have room for, but sometimes you do. So the speaker starts the poem with his father. Okay. Let's look through questions 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And then 7.2 and 7.3, we'll keep working on those in a minute. Let's keep going. Number 6, we know the father is comparing the situation between the people and the worms to the speaker's situation with his best friend. How could the speaker respond to his best friend in a way that is like a person stepping on worms? How can the speaker respond to his best friend in the way that is like a person stepping on? It's like, because the speaker doesn't want to step on his best friend, or step on those words when they go back into the ground. He's wanting things to go back to normal, the way they were before. The father gives another way to respond to the worms in stanza 2, this is question 7. Which of the two responses does the father seem to think is best? So what way do you think the father is saying is best? Is it best for us to dwell on the negativity, dwell on the things that were hurtful? Certainly confronting people and telling them that it's hurtful, sometimes that's a good thing. It depends on what they do. Can't speak directly into any given situation here, but in this poem, this particular thing is saying, leave them alone for a little bit. The father gives his son advice in the form of an implied metaphor. Rather than telling his son directly how to respond to his friend, the father makes a comparison between the way to handle worms and the way to handle hurtful words. How might hurtful words and worms be alike? Give a reason from the poem to support your answer. And that if you do something with the hurtful worms, if you concentrate on them too much, you're going to just make more of a mess. Don't concentrate so much on those things. And I tell you guys this, the way you react, the way you respond is just as important as the way somebody else acts to you. Your response is what I'm looking for in this with this. Your response to negative behavior, to discouragement, And in life, this is a life lesson for you too. When someone says something to you, if you say something hurtful back, you're only causing a bigger problem. You're only making a bigger mess. We can't have that. We can't. We need to try to avoid causing more trouble than there already is. Discouragement is never going to be fixed by more discouragement. You need to encourage. You need to help. You need to give thoughtful words instead of hurtful words. That's why the writer says, give them space. Give them space. This is a best friend we're talking about. This isn't just some random person. The best friend. So you just need to give them space. Okay. Number 10, right? The difference exists between the way, let's see. Number 9 says, unless they are sick, which the father of this poem does not seem to be, they usually don't clear their throats when they feel choked up. So why is the father emotional in this poem giving his son advice? That's just one for you to think about. Why would he be emotional giving his son advice? Number 10, what difference exists between the way the speaker initially reacts in the situation and the way the father tells him he should? Okay. Once I get done with that, we move on to 7.2. You are doing 7.2 and 7.3. 7.2 is this is where we're revising our previous metaphor. You can work with a partner on this one. In the last lesson, you worked with a partner to write original metaphors. Now you and your partner will use revision to think about how to use a different version of a metaphor in a poem. Okay. We talked about the writing process a little bit, and we'll continue to do that because this is English class. What is this? The writing process. Okay, so begins with planning, and then you draft, then you revise, you evaluate, you share, you go back to planning and drafting. That process goes off for a little bit. Then you go to editing. Sometimes after you edit, you still have to go back and, fix anything you need to fix, and then you publish it. That's the writing process that we talk about in this class, and we will continue to talk about in this class. Same is true here. So you're taking that implied metaphor. Okay, your poem will use an implied metaphor to compare human character situations to different kinds of situations in the animal world. And we talked about it with the Emily Dickinson poem. So write down the metaphor you wrote in the previous lesson. So make sure you've done lesson 6 before you do lesson 7. Working with a partner, list as many ways as possible the animal's action could resemble or represent a human situation. This is not hard for us, because we see animated movies all the time. Zootopia, among others. And obviously those are more anthropomorphic, and personification. All those things that you're seeing animals do things that they wouldn't do. So let's talk about animals in a real life situation opposed to that. Be more like, the bird and the worm in Emily Dickinson's poem. Okay, so remember Gerber's poem, it used an animal action as a metaphor for a human situation, the worms on the ground. And you want your poem to do the same. Try to include some things that are on the class list your teacher wrote down. Look over these ideas and find one you want to describe in your poem and circle it. So you're listing here all the different kinds of animal actions, and you can work with a partner on doing that, obviously. As it says, describe in one sentence what you will be comparing in your poem. So are you comparing worms to hurtful words? I hope not, because that's what Gerber did. We want you to do something different. Explain how these things are similar. So that's what you're doing in 7.2. Now, 7.3. It's time to draft your work. You will follow these steps to write your draft. Number 1, review your metaphor. An example, the writer decided to compare the flapping wings of a bird to doing homework every night. The writer decided these two things were similar because each one seems like a little task. When you put a little task together, it adds to something bigger. It's like little birds flapping its wings, it leads to flight. Doing your homework every night leads to successful grades and getting accomplished, because that's what we want, is for you to be successful and to do well and to remember all of the things that we've taught you. Compose a title. Your title should name the human action you are describing. Write the poem's first draft. So the title of this example would be like The Bird Takes Flight, something like that. Write your poem's first draft. Because this is an implied metaphor, you're not going to state directly that you're comparing two different things. Your poem should not mention the human action. It should only discuss the animal action. Here's the example poem, doing homework every night. The bird's wings flap over and over and over, each time early in the morning. Each time only moving a few inches up, then down. The same again and again and again. The wings never go very far. With their small flaps, the bird itself flies for many miles. Now on 7.3, you are writing your final poem. Remember, your poem does not have to be exactly the same as the example poem. In fact, it shouldn't be the same as the example poem. Don't plagiarize. You use your own imagination, your own thought process. When you finish drafting your poem, make sure to go back and look it over. Did you include any mention of human action? Change it if you don't want to have human action in there. As you read, find a place where you could add one more detail to your poem to make the description even stronger. Do your best on 7.3, as you have on all of the other work. Again, the vocabulary is in there. Remember your vocabulary, because there's always a chance for a quiz. Good day.